Welcome to The Doc Analyzes Anything, where psychology and science meet as we attempt to explain any and every human behavior, including behavioromatic 5000 spinning. That's what we called it, right?
It's not, yeah, it's something like that. I was going to change it every time, probably. So.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, not on purpose, just as I won't remember.
Blowing on food that isn't hot. That's not that weird.
I actually have to do that quite a bit just to convince my children that the food's not hot. So
that's actually exactly what I was thinking of when you just said that. I was like, I sat at your guys' dinner table where there is a room temp food, and your son is just.
I salt my food before tasting it.
That is not a good idea a lot of the time.
Yeah.
You come to my house, you are going to be oversalted because I salt everything, I would say perfectly, but who knows? All right. So before we get too deep into all these other conversations, we receive some feedback that we should probably tell you all what we're talking about before we dive into the banter too deep. So today we're going to be talking about and analyzing what kind of weirdos like listening to people talk about murders and serial killers and other interesting crimes, like in a true crime podcast. Put your hand down.
I was acknowledging that I am one of them.
I know what you're saying. So we'll get into all that in a minute. But I am Dr. Steven Sparks. Here's my co-host, as always, Kyle Steury. And again, with us is Dr. Bradley. I had to stop my crime spree because my fingerprints are now on file, Clements. And
it's a good reason to stop.
Yeah,
had something to get me off the wagon.
Yeah. I mean, that new job getting out of school, they take like the feds take your fingerprints, and I just don't trust the super glue. You know what I mean? You gotta lay off.
I'm just gonna go to the oven or the stove and just burn them.
Men in Black, right? Men in Black scene where he burns his fingerprints off.
Yeah, but what if they grow back? You know what I mean? Like I have shaved off parts of a fingerprint before and it came back. So
I can just feel like my dad and just take a mandolin to it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like obviously, I am not a careful person, and they're still there. So I'm sure. But I was listening to an audiobook the other day that was not on what I thought it was going to be on at all, but it told the story of this guy who was a career criminal, robber, escape artist from prison. And he's like, in this book, basically told during the interview how to get away with robbery. He was caught the last time, I think it was at 78, even though he had plenty of money. He just needed the thrill, I guess. I guess we could analyze that at some point too. But he said nail polish on the fingertips so you don't have to wear gloves. Nobody's like, you're in Florida, 90 degrees, they're gonna be like, why is that guy wearing gloves? But just some nail polish on there will cover him up enough and go right into your thing. I feel like everybody has irrational fears, and being arrested for a murder I did not commit because of touch DNA is fairly high on my list, probably because I've listened to way too many hours of true crime podcasts.
Okay, so you two are some of these weirdos that enjoy these podcasts, right?
Yes,
Absolutely not. I had to do research for this podcast just years in advance before I ever knew I was going to be doing it. Thousands of hours of research to analyze this correctly. It is work. It is not for my pleasure. Okay, Kyle. Jeez.
I'm not. No, I like it. I don't waste my breath like this man just did. I will acknowledge my faults.
Everything I do is for academia purposes. Okay, so and we started listening. What?
The beer trying to.
The beer tasting is obviously just to see what everybody else is doing at those gatherings. No, yeah, my wife and I got into it probably 5-6 years ago, and it was really just whenever we're in the car on a road trip, go up north camping or wherever we're going, and we had a few that we listened to. Like Crime Junkies is the one I'm still not allowed to listen to on my own because I have to wait for her. And so like at one point we were just like waiting for the next episode. Now we have kids and we don't go places very often anymore. And so I have to wait till we go on a long car ride. And then we have like one ear pod in each ear so we can listen to it while the kids are watching a Disney movie in the back seat or what have you.
Yep.
But when I'm in the car, I'm either listening to an audiobook or a true crime podcast usually, and I have my normal go-tos, like most of the audio chuck ones. So for example, Kyle, you were out in the wilderness for a week in Acadia National Park. Have you listened to Park Predators?
I saw you mention that. I'm not a big true crime guy, so no.
We'll get into how you're the weirdo here in a minute, but that's beside the point.
I probably came across a few park predators whilst wandering the wilderness. You're like when you're way out in the middle of nowhere and you just pass by a guy and you're like, oh, I don't know who that guy was.
Yeah, no, it's all about murders in like national forests and national parks and things like that, but like around the world, not just the US, but mostly the US. And I can't remember the stories off the top of my head because I've listened to so many, but I am like 99% sure that some probably took place pretty close to where you just were. So
Gotcha. The real crime was the entry fee.
Oh,
just kidding.
Yeah,
we use my dad's senior citizen pass, so I it's just a joke.
I was gonna say we're gonna edit that out, but truthfully, now we're gonna hold that against you because that's one step away from using your dad's like handicap sticker. So
we told him he needed one. Parking was a monstrosity too.
Well, actually, for your campsite, were you able to pull your car up to the site itself, or was it one of those places that you needed to park and then walk like a quarter mile with all your stuff?
So we stayed in a cabin. So nothing too.
I was gonna say you used to be able to leap there and assumed he was camping. Kyle was glamping at best, I'm sure.
It was glamping. It was like textbook glamping. However, we put ourselves in more rugged outback situations where we were wandering the cliffs and looking at the. I saw a bald eagle and a harbor seal in the same breath. So that's kind of like where we were.
Were they fighting? Because that would have been even more epic.
I tried to pit them against each other, and they weren't biting on it. It didn't happen.
Just you bring up the bald eagle. I don't know. I think it's funny, so I'm gonna bring this out. You can edit it out if you'd like. But me and Steve a couple years ago, we had the most American thing happen. We were on the boat 4th of July up northern Michigan. I think we had it was either country music or DMX. So
no, absolutely not country music going on while I'm on the boat. I do not do the country music.
Okay, so then it was DMX. But we shotgunned a beer, and I think it was like a cheap beer, like a Miller Lite, America's beer, if you will, with a bald eagle flying overhead.
On the 4th of July.
More like a true-blooded American.
On the 4th of July. Now, you say that it's a little bit like, because we're not really like the America prototypical types necessarily, but it did feel a little nostalgic there, being on the holiday and all. Like, someone should have shot off some fireworks, even though it was broad daylight, just at that moment, just to really tie it all in. But
catch a touchdown pass right there on the boat.
Yeah,
you have all your ends covered.
Like, what is it about true crime that you think is the major draw to individuals? What keeps them coming back?
How are you going to ask a question that we were literally going to spend an entire episode talking about? You know what I mean? Like,
no, I like it.
I'm trying to reel it back in.
I like it. It's bold. If you can't make the sale in the first 5 seconds, then what are we even doing?
It's reinforcing. Episode over.
This has been
another episode.
All right, let me ask, not even in a general perspective, then what is it that you find entertaining with listening to these, Dr. Sparks?
So to really think about, what my history of it and where I became reinforcing for me to think about these things, I think I've got to go back to probably being a younger than I should have been child and my dad introducing me to Silence of the Lambs. That's still probably my favorite movie to this day, even though it may be, it stands up to time, but there's better made movies. There's more thought-provoking movies, but I still just love that. And I go back to it periodically. And so I think that really got me interested, but the fact that the internet was a wild place back in those times. There was not a lot of solid content. You couldn't just go on and search and find a documentary on any serial killer, any person basically in history at that point. And so I think I was really stuck to a lot of those kind of entertainment type sources and not necessarily nonfiction type sources until later on when it was, all right, there's a documentary on, I didn't even have cable for most of my life growing up as a kid. And so saw something on Discovery Channel or History Channel, if they have those. I'm not sure where I was watching it for sure. And then later on being able to just oh, I heard about this. I should be able to look that up and learn way too much about Ed Gein in the first 5 minutes. Once I heard that Texas Chainsaw Massacre and many of the historical scary movies were loosely based on this crazy person, So I think that takes me where it all originated from for me, but actual reasons and why people find it reinforcing, I think, is going to be a big part of this conversation, because there's a lot of different ways, and I doubt it's any one reason for any one individual. I bet a lot of people, find the story interesting, but also want to solve the puzzle while they're hearing the story and that sort of thing. I don't think we've mentioned on here before. Has anybody, either ancillary or directly, been part of a true crime story that would be something you might hear on one of these?
Ooh.
Yeah.
I had friends in high school who beat up a mannequin in a parking lot one time, and just bad timing. They were on their way to pick me up. I was waiting for them to pick me up, and I found out the next day they spent the night in the local jail. Simultaneous calls coming in. Somebody's thinking a person's getting beat up in a parking lot. It was actually just a mannequin. At the same time, across the street, there was a double homicide that they were unaware of. Calls coming at the same time. So two 17-year-old idiots getting held down at gunpoint in the JCPenney parking lot because they decided to try and pull a Steve-O Johnny Knoxville thing. That's about as true crime as I've been a part of, and I wasn't even really part of it.
Yeah, that's close enough. Really.
It was kind of like listening to a podcast before they existed.
Crime Junkie, one of the rules is it's never a mannequin. So the fact that in this case it was a mannequin,
really,
they're always talking about how many people see a body and just thought it was a mannequin and they don't call it in. And so that's one of their life rules, I think.
It absolutely was a mannequin.
I'd say I probably could. So there's a podcast called The First Degree where they interview people who are just 1 degree separated from the crime.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so so-and-so's uncle, or I was friends with the person that did this, that sort of thing. And I've been meaning to write in and just have always been too lazy to, but I did ride with a spree killer a week before he went on the killing spree, and actually got picked up. It was the Kalamazoo Uber killer, and I actually was picked up outside the bar that he was arrested outside of and driven home by him a week to the day before the spree occurred.
So he was an Uber driver, or a ride share? Okay.
No, he was the Uber driver, and he claims that the app was telling him who to kill. He was not killing any of his passengers, but he was shooting people randomly on the street between picking up and dropping off passengers.
Okay. So this wasn't a situation where he got a bad rating and sought vengeance.
No, this
There's no
and
rhyme or reason to how he went about his actions.
yeah, I mean, it was just
Whoa.
a lady outside an apartment building, a family outside of a restaurant, um, dad and his teenage son outside of a car dealership, like just random.
Wow.
Yeah,
Never
and
heard of
so
this guy.
I was at home that weekend visiting family. Otherwise, I would have been out at the bars again. I think Friday may have been Saturday night. And getting calls from people like freaking out, like, "Are you out there? Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, what are you talking about?" Look online. I'm like, they showed the picture of the guy after he got arrested. Man, he looks kind of familiar. I pulled up the Uber app. I'm like, "Oh shoot, that was a week ago." All right then.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah, all I remember from the encounter at all was he was very disheveled and had a kind of high pitched voice. He was kind of freaked out because there was a group of gentlemen outside getting in an argument. He's like, are they gonna fight? I'm like, I think they'll figure it out. It'll be all right. And like that's all I really remember from my conversation with them. But
You didn't see him like write them down on a list or anything?
no. And although it was closing time, it could have happened. I may have just missed it too. We won't get into why that would have been, but
Man, this guy was on CNN looking at it
oh,
now.
it was huge.
I think Obama came to Kalamazoo after that happened and addressed the public.
So and this may be different times too. Kalamazoo, like one of the high schools or one of the students won an award that he came to their commencement speech. So he wasn't there, I don't think, because of it, but I may be misremembering. But I do think he may have mentioned it in the speech or something like that. But this was, I think, just a few months before I finished my PhD. I was probably in the midst of writing my dissertation when this all happened.
I remember being in February because I remember that night it was called Dance Marathon for our high school. It was just like some fundraiser thing. And then I get a text from my mom saying that was going on. And me and my friends, we were at like a pizza place. And it's like, that sounds crazy, but good thing he's on like the other side of the town. But like, I didn't even have the idea that this guy could have like drove back over towards our side.
He was,
that's how I remember it.
He was like on all sides at some points, I think. So
yeah.
Hopefully his ride-sharing app was controlling his mind and demanded that he kill at random.
Yeah, he said it would turn red or something. That's how he knew who he was supposed to kill. But what's not been determined is, did he really believe that or not? You know, they've never done a full assessment and found out, was he really delusional or what was going on there? So, all right, enough talk about me, because this is already all about me enough, probably. So, so I was thinking about, and I wanted to open the statement calling everybody weirdos because that's just who I am. But thinking about, is it really weird to like to listen about crime and that sort of thing? And I was thinking about it, and I think like this sort of thing goes back probably throughout much of human history. You know what I mean? It's just as a form of entertainment, even though it's real. And so looking at the humans in our current form, probably been around for a couple 100,000 years, but humanoids who are skeletal remains are at least close enough to be considered or thought of as humans. We're looking at 4 to 6 million years. And I was interested, like, all right, when was the first time there was evidence that this sort of behavior occurred? And found out that, you know, cave paintings really don't go back as far as I thought they did. Like, we're talking maybe 40,000 years, the early ones. And it was just like I think it was a pig that they found on a wall, and maybe Indonesia, that was like some of the early, but it really wasn't until agricultural cultures like 12,000 years ago that really allowed larger civilizations and basically allowed forms of entertainment to really occur, because now you didn't have to just scrounge around and hunt all day long just to survive that day and then start again the next day. And larger civilizations like cities didn't come around until like 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. So it was wild to me to really think about in the terms of like, that is no time whatsoever that we've been doing this. And now here we are on this weird electronic thing, looking at each other from different states. You know what I mean? So the oldest cave painting showing human on human violence was about 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And I find it, kind of analogous. So it's maybe similar, but not the exact same thing. But unless you are recording history at that point for the sake of trying to teach people so they don't, experience the same mistakes you did previously at that point, which without more context, it would be hard for that cave painting to really have that purpose. Why else would you depict that other than to relive or have a memory of some battle? And is it really any different than learning about, true crime? It seems like it's a step or two removed from, having depicted this one form of violence versus another.
There's some similarities between creating and being interested in observing acts of violence in painting form to nowadays listening to like a full-blown production about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about it, you're seeing it, you're telling stories about it one way or the other. The media is different, the actions were different, and the societal norms at that point obviously were much less complex. And so it probably wouldn't have been thought of necessarily as this person was wrong with what they were doing, as much as, hey, these people were bad compared to us, and so we had to fight back, sort of thing. But I think you can see that, like, really historically in human societies, once we started having the ability to live in larger groups and have some of these social norms where, all right, can't steal, can't murder, otherwise this society is not going to exist much longer. Even before then, we already saw people depicting violence and human on human violence.
Gotcha.
And it's only 2,000 years ago that, the Romans had the gladiators in the Colosseum, and they were, basically sitting back watching them bludgeon and butcher each other for entertainment purposes. And it's interesting to know that the idea basically is the less you had to struggle to survive, the more entertainment seemed to be a priority. And that seems to be when we see a little bit more of these instances of, all right, we're just going to let people pit each other against themselves, or we're going to listen to this type of behavior and find it entertaining. There's also some other instances with increase in societal violence, when things aren't going well too, like famine, drought. There was a study, and I'm probably not going to portray it perfectly, but it's a behavior analytics study done a long, long time ago when it was just still animal research, where they took, I believe it was a pigeon, they electrified the floor and then taught it to peck a key to turn off the electrification. And it was basically to learn about the escape maintain behavior, or basically you have an aversive before condition, the behavior, and then the behavior removes that aversive condition, and it is reinforcing. It's basic negative reinforcement, which, for everybody listening, everyone in the media gets that wrong and thinks punishment is negative reinforcement. It's not. So I've always been a little salty. Even like Big Bang Theory seemed to be at least halfway decent with their scientific knowledge, but they got that one wrong. And it's going to probably bother me much more than almost anybody else in the world. But,
you should write a letter.
Yeah, now that the show's been off the air for like 10 years, I'll write them an angry letter. Like, how dare you do this?
It's a good idea.
This has been bothering me for a full decade, you jerks. No, but so they were testing the escape maintain behavior, see how it worked. And then they turned off the ability for the key peck to stop the electrification. So there was no longer discomfort, or they were no longer able to remove the discomfort. And it will note that this wasn't electrified enough to do physical damage, but it was enough to cause, the discomfort at some level anyways. But they wanted to see what would happen, so they allowed the key peck to open a window where another bird was on the other side and in the next chamber over. And they found that the pigeons would, when in the presence of an aversive condition like that they couldn't escape from, would aggress against other pigeons and would actually respond in a way or peck that key to gain access to the other pigeons in order to aggress. And it's very similar to nowadays. You stub your toe and yell at the dog, even though the dog didn't make you stub your toe. You know what I mean? It is aversive conditions, when you can't escape from them, create motivation for aggression. And so you see that, in the history books and reading, historical papers from people who know a lot more about this stuff than I do, showing that in times of drought, there's not enough food, people became much more violent against other people. And sure, it could be that maybe they have food and we'll try to attack them to get more food, but it also very likely was that aggression towards others was just a lot more reinforcing during those times of strife.
So to tie us into listening to true crime, we all are in some sort of pain or anguish, and we find relief by participating in listening to the pain and anguish of others.
I think it is obvious in the society we are right now that very few people are comfortable with happening, regardless of what side of the issue you're on. You know what I mean? One way or the other, people are finding things very uncomfortable, which is kind of designed by our political system. Because if you think about it, sure, there is bad stuff happening around us, but survival in this time and age is much easier than any other time in history. I mean, there are very few major wars going on. All right, we'll get that. That's just another rabbit hole we don't need to go down right now in terms of how we're painted to feel like we're in aversive conditions in order to keep people in power. But it does seem to be that way. And that's from, again, both political parties. We're not taking either side on that stance right here. But I think everybody's fairly uncomfortable with what's happening in the world. So it could be that aggression is more reinforcing. It doesn't mean that it is. We can't say for sure that is occurring and that has anything to do with people listening to these things right now. But it is a possibility that that's what's going on. And I would say that that's why, since COVID started, the biggest reason we see so much of an uptick in like road violence and people driving aggressively and that sort of thing. It does seem like a different place to live, and there's a lot more aggression out there in the world right now. And it's very likely because we're still, recovering from having gone through in a very aversive condition there.
See, I think that I'm more prone to enjoy. Again, I don't really listen to the podcast or anything, but I like a good movie, and I don't mind the violence or the some sort of crime being committed in a movie, as long as there's like resolution in the end. Like I like movies where the good guy wins.
I will say that there are a lot of people, just you can tell by the feedback that the podcasters get and the way they talk about it, that there are people that do not like the unsolved mystery ones as much. There's some people that really dig that sort of thing, but a lot of them are like, there's one podcast, True Crime All the Time. They have both their normal episodes and then the unsolved ones. And like, probably because they had too many people getting frustrated, like, oh, this one ended and I didn't find out who the killer was. Like, what the heck's going on here? You know what I mean?
So they just leave. It's like, this is all we know, and they made like a huge production, but it's like, you interpret who done it.
It's sometimes like, hey, everybody's pretty sure this is who did it, but they can't prove it. Sometimes it's like, we don't know. There's just like 20 bodies out there. Can't even say 100% sure, like for sure that they're all interconnected, but maybe they are, and there's everything in between there too, so it's really, I think there's a large section of people who do not like to have that cliffhanger, especially when it may or may not ever be, completed, versus some people I think probably really dig that sort of thing and enjoy the mystery of it all, or trying to solve it on their own. And depending on the episode, I'm definitely one of those people that I'm trying to figure out before they tell me the ending. You know what I mean? Like I'm playing junior detective, even though I'm only using the information they're providing, and it's never the complete story from all sides because they only have so much time to tell the story. But I mean, even in a documentary, there's always going to be a little bit of a skew to one side or the other, depending on what the creators feel was actually occurring there. But
quick question for both of you then. So because I'm putting you guys as like kind of the splits, where Steve really enjoys this stuff, where you, Kyle, it's like you can give or take it. So then let me ask you, and this might be kind of a silly way to relate it back. The game Clue. Do you guys enjoy the game Clue?
I did as a child. It's a little simple now. Like I want a little bit more in depthness. I want to actually have to struggle to solve something and look at clues, not just. It's still fun. I will play it, but no, I do not sit around playing Clue.
Steve enjoys it. He's a vote yes. Kyle, do you or do you not?
Hang on. I'm trying to remember which one's Clue.
Professor Plum in the kitchen with the rope.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
Would you take that game, or would you take something like Monopoly over it?
I enjoy Monopoly.
Okay. Oh, I would. I do Monopoly all day.
Sorry,
I don't know that I've played Clue.
You're taking Clue.
I'll choose Monopoly for the sake of illustration.
So I would choose Monopoly, but just because I know every rule inside and out, and I can use that to my advantage and usually win because people don't know all the ancillary rules. Like my wife will never play with me again after the first time we played because their family had the house rules that if you ran out of houses, you could use other items to keep building houses. But in the real game, you run out of houses, there's nothing else to build. So if you have enough property, you fill it up with houses that never build a hotel, nobody else can build a house, and you can win that way. So like I make a major trade, she's thinking she can go grab pennies out of her parents' like penny jar to use. I'm like, wait a minute, you didn't give me this house rule. We gotta play by the rules.
That's not how the real world works.
I win. And so she says I cheat and she'll never play with me again.
Two things. That is complete nonsense. I agree with you. Two, Steve, I will completely embarrass you in Monopoly. So next time we're in person, 1v1, no holds barred. Brad can play too if he doesn't have access to pennies and other ancillary items.
I mostly want him to play so we can see him crying in the corner while we're wiping the floor with him.
I'll be honest, I feel like I would like Monopoly, but I haven't played it enough. Like I don't actually know the rules of it, but I do have. So I went to MSU, or Michigan State University, I should say, and I have a Spartanopoly that I bought when I graduated undergrad. And I mean, for reference, that was like 5.5, 6 years ago, and it's still in the wrapper. So
yeah, well, mine would still be two, but that's because nobody will play with me. So.
Well, we can play soon. I can tell you that some of my friends would probably love that game, and then we get a new side.
What was your original? Where were you going with that distinction? I'm curious.
Clue distinction.
Because I was trying to think about, or Steve's talking about, like where you want to know what happened to who killed, or like how it happened, and like where he's really trying to think about who did it, putting all the pieces together, where you're not liking it a whole lot. But I guess, and you even kind of said that you like it in movies because then there is like resolution. But
I've listened to them before, and I've heard the ones that have resolution, when well made. I enjoy listening to it.
Okay.
But I don't think I could. I mean, I'll listen to it like I'll listen to like my Green Day CDs from when I was in 6th grade. You know what I mean? Like if it's like, oh, that feels like something I could listen to. But when it's like Well, I don't know if I could stick with it if there's no resolution. If it's just like, here's the facts, you figure it out. See you later. I also am a little leery of like some kid who's like starting a podcast and going to this like random small town and like just like upending like years of past like trauma and like different neighborhoods. Like, hey, you were
Hey,
this guy's mom.
it's all worth it for my entertainment. Okay. No, I always do wonder about some of that, but a lot of the times they do seem to be like actually trying to help bring closure to the family. So as long as the family's cool with it,
Yeah.
I'm not going to not listen. But yeah, it's some of those too, like the original Serial, where I think half the world's still outraged, or like outraged. That's the word, right? In an uproar, outraged, what have you. That the guy was in prison when there was so much potential evidence against. But again, is that truly the evidence was so closely against him being guilty, or was it that was just the way it was presented to the audience? And it's hard to know from an audience perspective, because there's got to be a reason that this guy still or was still in prison. I can't remember if they've let him out now or not, or like, was it really that egregious and nobody was doing anything about it even after it became public?
Yeah.
I will also say, though, for those of us that like to solve it, and for me personally, I won't speak for others, but there's also that piece in the back, like, well, that dummy, why did you make that mistake? I could have gotten away with that way longer. You know what I mean? And
Talk
so,
more about that, because that's one thing that I don't really think of is like when they catch him, I don't think like I would have hidden the alley. Like my mind's not going there.
so I mean, I think there's a part of it is just assuming so much of it that you're like seeing the common mistakes and thinking like, oh, well, that was silly, don't do that. Part of it, I'm sure, is being desensitized to the violence itself. And I think I've probably become particularly desensitized just because, as a kid growing up, my mom was an ER nurse. And so we'd be sitting at Thanksgiving dinner and she'd be like, oh, you should have seen this case. Someone came in, it was decapitated. You could see their brain. It was crazy. And like, that was just how my childhood was hearing about these things,
Man.
And like, the best was when a friend like from like middle school or high school would come over for dinner and there'd be a story like that, and like the look on their face would just be like, what did you guys just talk about?
I find that happens just telling people about my job in general.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do for a living? Like, oh, I help people who swallow batteries sometimes. Or like, wait, what? And like, oh, that wasn't even like the big thing.
No, we've had several murders that we can't give you the details of because of confidentiality, but it is something that we see fairly regularly too. And I went through like the firefighter academy, and I think it was actually the EMT classes I took where like they basically showed you pictures of gory car accidents. I remember there was one in particular where someone was running from the police and they tried to jump off an overpass but impaled themselves on a pole and like it split them in half. I'm like, not very many people could look at that and handle it. And those that can, especially at that point, I'm like, is there something wrong with us? But going back to what we were talking about, like civilization as a whole, I think I read like the last public execution in the United States was 1936 and 20,000 people showed up. You know what I mean? So it has just been something that we're probably more sensitized more sensitive about now than we ever have been in the history of humans, because we don't see death out our door all the time like happened maybe 150 years ago or so.
There's like a combination then of like societal selection, cultural selection going on in conjunction with just like, I don't know where I'm going with that, but there's definitely a cultural selection going on in these things. We're still meeting, like the reinforcement's still being attained, but it's just it's a little different. Like the essence is the same, but the form is different.
Well, I mean, there's a lot more entertainment in general. Like you can turn on your TV and find 100 different things at any point. I think historically, like bored was just normal. Either you were fighting to survive, bored, or every once in a while, hey, there's a public hanging, let's go down and check it out. You know what I mean? We're talking back in those times, we were still in the radio stories. And so that was regular entertainment at regular intervals, but it wasn't all day, every day, nonstop. And I think about being a kid growing up in like the 90s and early 2000s, like I didn't stay in the house. We had
Nope.
5 channels. There was nothing on any of them most of the time. And I was either out on my bike, or when I was a teenager, I was out driving around trying to find something to do because I needed to keep myself busy 24/7, where I'm sure 150 years ago, you were just happy to be bored for a minute because you were fighting to survive so much. Plus,
Sure.
with the life expectancy being so much lower and having less policing around you to catch perpetrators all the time, it was probably fairly normal to hear of an atrocity not too far away, or hear someone becoming ill and dying and seeing that with your own eyes close up and personal. Whereas now you almost have to seek out and find those instances. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that listen to this and be like, you're all weird. You were right in the first place. But like in historical context, this is fairly normal, I think that there's so many different reasons people would find this sort of thing reinforce me. And it does all just come down to reinforcement. But like all the people that like to be out fighting for injustices, finding a story that's either unsolved or solved in a way they don't like, I think a lot of people prefer those, thinking about making a murderer. And we don't know for sure how much that was edited to make it sound like those guys were railroaded. I would say that the nephew, who seems to have had, or at least was portrayed to have special needs, seems like he was probably railroaded and should not have been in prison the rest of his life. But again, that's just the way it was portrayed to us as the viewer. We don't know. But people love an opportunity to be a social justice warrior and get out and fight the system that's hurting people for no reason. And so I think that is one reason that a lot of these shows, at least the ones that take that approach and hunt down long individual stories over time that show, like, listen, justice may not have been doled out, is reinforcing for those people. I think some people just like to be frightened. I know, Kyle, we had mentioned that before, that you're not a fan of like things, the jump scare type.
It's the jump scares. Yeah. It doesn't, it's not enjoyable for me. I don't like peeing involuntarily.
Peeing your pants is cool. Consider me Miles Davis. No, the jump scares I think feel kind of cheap to me, although I have a lot of friends that just absolutely love that sort of thing. But even for like the movie Halloween, I think it was like when it was remade by Rob Zombie, I think was it 2007, 2011, I don't know, something like that, where it showed like him as a child and the history of how he became Michael Myers rather than just showing him walking around killing people. That was way more entertaining to me than just him being there and murdering people. And so, but for some people, just that idea of like, this could be me, I could be hiding in this dark room, it would be scary. That probably makes it reinforcing for them.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times you just like a villain too, you know what I mean? And like maybe not a serial killer, although you do have a lot of people that write in and even marry serial killers while they're in prison. Think about the Ted Bundy tapes and like how many people just were obsessed with him because he was a fairly good looking guy and had some charisma. And it's no different than, people rooting for Bonnie and Clyde when they were out, robbing banks and running around, or there's just something about that criminal life that seems intriguing. Like, yeah, I'm here working a 9 to 5, but I could be riding around the country, robbing banks, having a great old time. And so maybe there's a little bit of that too, even though if you were really in the moment there, I can guarantee you that the stress of being caught or being killed is easily going to outweigh any excitement you feel afterwards, at least for a normal person. Now, I do think you have someone that's a serial killer, they're often at least described as being sociopaths, just meaning that they're not experiencing the emotions the same way your average person would. And that might be the difference, what sets them apart from someone who's really interested in this sort of thing, who is desensitized to the point where the actual murder itself wouldn't be so horrible to hear or see or be part of. But there's the first lack of motivation. Like, I have no reason to want to hurt somebody else. And then second of all, that severe fear of like, these people are just willing to give away the rest of their lives for like 1 minute of reinforcement, whether it's the thrill or whatever sexual deviant behavior, whatever else is involved. And that's, I think, the part for a lot of people that they couldn't actually put themselves in that position of why they wouldn't do some of those behaviors, is because you're signing your entire life away and the motivation wasn't there in the first place,
There is like a level of excitement or like a brand of excitement that's kind of inaccessible, like unless you actually go through with it, like planning, premeditating, the ins and outs of like getting to that point, and then like also like avoid getting caught. Like law-abiding citizens don't really get to, unless you're like planning a surprise party or something where some element of deception's involved, but there's no criminal activity, but you don't really get the same thrill that you would as a criminal.
Yeah, and I'd say like giving away way too much information about myself, but like as a teenager or a young man, I was like an ancillary character in some underworld type activities. We'll just leave it at that. But like at first it was the excitement and fun rolling around with the crew, doing things that, was anti-social norms, will we get caught, that sort of thing. And then like once people started getting in trouble, or like there started being weapons involved and things like that, like quickly it became like, all right, I need to find something else to do with my life, because now the anxiety has taken over any thrill that existed whatsoever. You know what I mean? Like,
Interesting.
hear a siren, I'm not even doing anything wrong right now, but you still get that creeping feeling. It's like, all right, some people I think just don't have that, or the outcome outweighs the fear itself. But for me, it definitely was not worth having to worry nonstop 24/7. And it was a quick switch. It was like one day we're having fun, one day we're not,
Sure.
And so with all this being said, kind of, do you think it's like the idea of living vicariously through these stories being told that gives people like a thrill, but then they know that they can just easily walk away from, and that's why they enjoy listening to it?
I think that's a subset. There's a lot of people that feel that way. But I think there's a lot of people that just like the mystery, like to solve it. And I don't want to ever say that you could assume any one person who likes to listen to this does it for the thrill or the feel of it. I just know that there are people who would get that out of it, if that is that sort of thing. It's kind of that living vicariously through, because it has been something that's reinforcing to the public for such a long time.
Okay.
We're coming up on an hour, just as a timestamp for us, so we know.
Yeah.
But I see in your notes you have something about the first weed brownie lady, and I really want to know what you're talking about.
So I realized as I was coming up with like, what to talk about here, that we are really pigeonholing this discussion into serial killers, sexual deviant, those darker side of the criminal underworld that people tend to listen to a lot. And one of the podcasts I really have enjoyed a lot is called Criminal, and it's mostly, or a lot of the time anyways, about fairly minor crimes, things that are legally criminal, but you wouldn't think of as terms of like, I'm listening to a true crime podcast. And so there wasn't the episode of like talking about the very first lady who supposedly invented weed brownies, and she's out in the San Francisco area selling her wares. I believe I may get this wrong, but I think it was like Fisherman's Wharf. She was out there during like the hippie era, just selling these weed brownies to people, and that is where the idea of weed brownies and the hype came from. Another one I believe was about the pirate radio, if you've all seen that movie, and like the guys that were illegally broadcasting, I think mostly what we would now call classic rock, and they were in international waters having this floating, I think it was a barge, but maybe there was an island out there, I'm not sure. And so like a lot of England was getting its music illegally without paying royalties, and they just stayed out there in international waters so they wouldn't get arrested. And the story of that.
A noble cause.
When was that?
Oh, don't ask questions I'm gonna have to look up answers to, man. Let's see. Does anybody
Before
know?
Spotify.
Yeah, well, no, I'm thinking it was like 70s, 80s, but I think it was on for quite a long time. Let's see. Well, the story about it was okay. Yeah. So yeah, all the British broadcasting were owned by the government, it looks like, and so that's why they wanted to put their own out there. So it began in the mid 1960s, and they broadcast out. So it was just more accessible, and so it would play the music that they actually wanted to play instead of what the BBC felt like should be played for everyone. There was one story, I think it was on Criminal, where they talked about where the term 420 came from. It was like just a bunch of high school students in California who wanted to go meet up, hang out, do crazy things, and get high. And so as a code word, they just used 420. So they knew when to meet up, and everybody knew to meet the same place at the same time when they'd share that. As one, I can't remember the details, but like animal stealing, and like, well, technically the little fellow was a criminal, even though you wouldn't prosecute. So that one is just kind of the lighter side, the more fun, interesting side of things that we should also put in and talk about in terms of true crime, even though it doesn't fit what most people would think we are talking about as we're talking about true crime.
Yeah, like there's those like kind of like petty theft. Like we're thinking like just being bored, stealing the candy bar for no reason other than I can and I got away with it.
But and some of them are that, and some of them where you're like, actually, I completely agree with these people. They were doing the right thing, but it was technically against the law.
Right.
Or some of them are just kind of wild. Like there's some sort of heist with like dogs for dog shows, like high-end dogs that like you would have never thought about the time, effort, and potential penalties put into this heist for a dog show. You know what I mean? But it occurred. And
Like
this is
people stole dogs, like they stole dogs to show.
Yeah, it's been several years since I heard that one, so I don't remember all the details. Truthfully, it could have even been cats. But I'm pretty sure it was a dog show. Little, like, I'm thinking it was Shih Tzu or some sort of small, pretty dog that it's often primped and proper and shown in the shows.
Yeah.
But I wish I had actually looked it up beforehand. So like now everybody's just gonna look it up and be like, "Well, you were way off." Those were actually gerbils, and
It's even better though.
it was like a carnival sideshow, and you were just way off on that.
So if you're listening, just know it involved gerbils or larger, but we don't know.
Yeah, yes. And there was an animal at some point, and it did something. That is the gist of this whole.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's a fun one. I haven't listened in a while just because I caught up on it and then I forgot to go back to it. So that'll give me something to listen to for a while now. How about any fun ones or any offshoots of true crime that we haven't talked about or that we probably should look into?
None that I'm aware of. I mean, pretty much I've been a very, murder type true crime listener. That's all I've ever really done.
Murder's all you've ever been involved. Yeah.
Should phrase that differently. My bad.
Just kind of had to let that like run through a couple times.
Wait a minute. Let's pull this back a second.
I was enjoying the long pause on that one. I was just really letting that feed me there. I don't know.
I was gonna say I can't anymore. The fingerprints are on record.
It's true.
Yeah, my
Oh.
fingerprints have been on record for a long time, so I've been good beyond any statute of limitations. We'll put it that way. Kyle,
I
they're
think
coming after
we've.
you still.
Oh yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I'll just put some fingernail polish on my fingerprints. I think what we've landed on is that a fascination with these things does not necessarily equate to some deep-seated root to want to be a criminal murderer mastermind. More so an entertainment factor slash some sort of reinforcer involving like resolution or relief or like accessing some sort of information that you've tried to problem solve yourself.
Yeah, I'd say
Am I hitting it?
I'd say it's fair to close that on that. It certainly does not mean you're a bad person. It's a lot of different reasons people may listen, but it's very likely that I listen because I'm a bad person, I think is where we can end that on.
And I think that's where we were going to wrap up on. Yes.
That being said,
No. So I know I always have my ending on here, but because I was looking up human history, and every time I look into this, it kind of blows my mind that how far we've come in such a little amount of time, considering, humanoids, whether it was, Homo sapiens or not, but like, close relatives have been around for such a long period of time. Yet we're talking anything that looks like our type of civilization is like 10,000 years old or less, sort of thing. And so every time I close with that, don't take life too seriously, because eventually, the sun will move into its next phase and life will not be habitable on this earth. So what's the point? But I did want to say that we also shouldn't take that too seriously, because we're looking at it's estimated 1 billion years from now that that next phase will come and life will not be will not be habitable. It will be inhabitable on Earth. And so we've come this far, 6, 7, 10,000 years. There's no saying that we won't be able to find a way off this planet and find a place to live. Now we'd have to find a way to make life sustainable for as many people as we have here in the meantime, and that will be a major goal. But don't take life too seriously, but also don't take anything I say too seriously either. It's all for fun here. And even if we do just find a way onto the next planet, one way or the other, we'll probably just be like the aliens from Independence Day, taking on and using the resources of the next planet till we move on to the next one after that. So one way or the other, don't take it too seriously.
you can't say that we'll be the aliens from Independence Day, because then that's where we will end. Because who is the actor that flew into the beam and blew up the ship? Imagine, all right, you're saying don't take life too seriously. If we can get serious now,
Randy Quaid does not exist, is what I'm saying.
Planet,